Chosen one, your soulmate called for you from the hospital. Don't ignore what happened after that. My child, listen carefully. Your soulmate called from the hospital, but the reason behind that call was far deeper than anyone around them understood. The moment your name appeared on their screen, something inside them changed. They had been surrounded by worried voices and uncertain decisions, yet in that moment, they wanted only to hear you. Do not skip this message. Stay until the end, because what happened after that call may explain why your connection has felt impossible to understand. The call came at a strange moment. Your soulmate had not planned to contact you. They had convinced themselves that silence was safer than explaining everything they were feeling. But from that hospital room, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and heavy emotions, their heart moved before their mind could stop it. They reached for the phone and searched for your name. Then they called. The first few seconds were filled with silence. Your soulmate seemed unable to find the right words. They asked where you were and whether you were okay. That question sounded simple, but it carried an emotion they had hidden for far too long. They were not calling only because they needed comfort. Something about that moment had forced them to recognize what still mattered. Then something unexpected happened. Someone else was nearby when the call began. That person noticed the change in your soulmate's expression. They noticed how their voice softened when they heard you. They also noticed how quickly every other concern seemed to disappear from their mind. Then one question was asked. Why did you call them? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. They looked away and remained quiet. That silence revealed something important. They had already been thinking about you before the call. The hospital had not created those feelings. It had simply made them impossible to ignore. Sometimes a difficult moment does not create a truth. It exposes one that was already waiting beneath the surface. Your soulmate may have spent months trying to convince themselves that moving forward without you was easier. They may have listened to other people and followed expectations. They may have believed distance would eventually make their feelings disappear. But when everything became uncertain, your name came naturally to their mind. That was the first shock. The second shock came after the call ended. Someone connected to your soulmate discovered that you had been contacted. Instead of reacting with anger, they asked what had been said. Your soulmate became unusually quiet. They did not want to explain the conversation. They only said that hearing your voice made them realize something they had been avoiding. The person listening then asked, "Are you still thinking about them?" Your soulmate paused. Then came the answer. "I never really stopped." Those words were not a promise. They were not a guaranteed prediction. They were a glimpse into an emotional truth that had remained unresolved. And that is why the hospital call matters so much. You may have believed the distance meant the connection was gone. You may have wondered why they disappeared or why their decisions seemed confusing. But this moment suggests another possibility. Their silence may have been their way of avoiding a decision they were not ready to face. There was another detail that made the situation even more surprising. After ending the call, your soulmate looked at their phone again. They opened your contact and stared at your name. Then they began typing another message. They deleted it. They started again. They stopped once more. That small action revealed the conflict inside them. One part wanted to reach toward you. Another part feared what might happen if they finally admitted everything they were feeling. They understood that one honest conversation could change the direction of their relationship. The message they almost sent was not about the hospital. It was about the past. They wanted to ask whether you still remembered a particular moment between you. It had seemed small at the time, but it had stayed with them long after everything else became complicated. A simple conversation had recently brought that memory back. Someone at the hospital had said something completely unrelated. That sentence triggered an old feeling. Suddenly, your face returned to their mind. Your voice returned. The peace they once felt around you returned. They realized something uncomfortable. They had been comparing every new connection to the feeling they once had with you. Then the phone rang again. This time, it was not you. It was someone who knew a part of the story you had never been told. They had information about why your soulmate pulled away. Information that could explain the strange distance and emotional confusion. Your soulmate listened carefully. Then their expression changed. Because what they heard forced them to question something they had believed for a long time. And that revelation is where everything begins to turn. Stay until the end. Something huge is waiting for you. The next truth does not simply explain why they called from the hospital. It reveals why that call may have arrived when they could no longer hide from what their heart had been trying to tell them. The room became unusually quiet after the second call ended. Your soulmate remained still, staring at the phone as if one final piece of the past had suddenly moved into place. The information they had just received was not what they expected. It connected several moments they had never understood and forced them to reconsider why they had walked away when their feelings were strongest. Something had been influencing their decisions for much longer than they realized. The person who called them did not reveal everything at once. They knew that one sentence would not be enough. They explained that the distance between you and your soulmate had been shaped by conversations that happened when you were not present. Some of those conversations came from people who believed they were protecting your soulmate. Others came from fear, uncertainty, and assumptions that were never properly questioned. Your soulmate listened without interrupting. Then they asked one question. Did they ever know? The answer was painful. No. That single word changed their expression. They suddenly understood why certain moments had felt incomplete. They remembered conversations where they had expected you to react differently. They remembered waiting for signs from you while you were possibly waiting for the same signs from them. Both sides had been reading silence as an answer. Neither side had known the whole story. That realization brought a new kind of sadness. It was not simply sadness about losing time. It was the realization that some of that time may have been lost because important words never reached the right person. Your soulmate looked toward the hospital window. Outside, the world continued moving normally. Cars passed. Lights changed. People walked through the building without knowing that someone inside was reconsidering an entire chapter of their emotional life. The hospital room suddenly felt like a place where every distraction had disappeared. They picked up the phone again. This time, they did not call immediately. They opened your contact and looked at the last conversation between you. They read it slowly. Every sentence seemed different now. A message that once looked ordinary suddenly appeared filled with meaning. They noticed something they had missed before. You had left the door open. Not literally. Emotionally. There had been no final statement. No clear ending. No moment where both of you agreed that everything was finished. There had only been distance, confusion, and time. That discovery made their breathing slower. They began remembering the last time they saw you. They remembered your expression. They remembered what they wanted to say but never said. They remembered the words that stayed trapped behind hesitation. Then they remembered why they stayed silent. Fear. Not fear of you. Fear of what admitting the truth would require. They had been afraid that choosing honesty would force them to disappoint someone else. They had been afraid of changing plans. They had been afraid of admitting that the path everyone expected them to follow did not feel right inside their heart. That fear had created distance. But now the hospital had changed their perspective. Suddenly, ordinary things felt less important. The opinions of others felt smaller. The unfinished conversation with you felt enormous. Then something happened that they did not expect. A family member entered the room. They noticed the phone in your soulmate's hand. They asked who they had been speaking with. Your soulmate hesitated. Then they said your name. The family member became silent. That reaction was immediate. There was history behind it. Your soulmate noticed the change and asked what was wrong. The family member tried to avoid the question at first. But eventually, they admitted that your name had been discussed before. Not recently. Not casually. It had been mentioned during a conversation that your soulmate never knew about. The details were still incomplete. But one thing became clear. Someone had known more than they had revealed. Your soulmate wanted answers. They asked what had been said. The family member looked uncomfortable. Then they explained that there had once been concern about how deeply your soulmate felt about you. They believed the connection could affect decisions that others had already expected them to make. That sentence changed everything. Your soulmate realized that what they thought was their own decision may have been shaped by outside pressure. They began questioning every moment. Was the distance truly their choice? Were the delays truly natural? Were the missed opportunities really accidental? Or had other voices quietly influenced the direction of their life? No one could answer those questions immediately. But the questions themselves were powerful. Your soulmate looked down at the phone again. Your name was still there. They whispered something almost too quietly to hear. I should have asked them. Those words carried regret. Not dramatic regret. Real regret. The kind that appears when someone finally realizes that an answer was always available, but they never had the courage to ask for it. Then their phone received a notification. It was a message from an unknown number. The message contained only one sentence. There is something you need to know about that call. Your soulmate stared at the screen. They read it twice. Then a third time. Their hands became still. They did not know who had sent it. They did not know what the message meant. But they understood one thing. The hospital call was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much deeper revelation. They opened the message. Another line appeared. Ask them what happened the night you both stopped talking. Your soulmate froze. Because they remembered that night perfectly. They had always believed they knew why everything changed. Now they were no longer certain. And for the first time, they began to wonder whether the person they needed to hear from was the same person they had just called from the hospital. The unknown message remained open on the screen for a while. Your soulmate could not look away from the final sentence. Ask them what happened the night you both stopped talking. Those words touched a memory they had buried beneath months of silence. They remembered every detail of that evening. Something had changed before either of you understood why. They had always believed the distance began with a misunderstanding. They thought you had become distant first. You may have believed they had become distant first. Both of you had carried separate versions of the same night. Neither version contained the entire truth. Your soulmate slowly searched through old messages. They found a conversation from that evening. Nothing seemed unusual. Then they noticed something they had never seen before. A message was missing from the conversation. There was a gap between two replies that made no sense. Why was that message missing? They remembered sending something important that night. They remembered waiting for your response. But the conversation showed no trace of it. Your soulmate checked again, wondering if memory had changed the details over time. Then they found an old screenshot. It was buried inside a folder they had forgotten about. The screenshot showed a message addressed to you. The message was honest and emotional. It explained that your soulmate wanted to talk before making an important decision. It said they did not want the distance between you to continue. It also asked you to meet and clear everything up. But you never received it. Your soulmate immediately understood why. Someone else had accessed their phone that evening. They remembered lending it to someone for a simple reason. Nothing seemed suspicious. The person had been near the phone for several minutes. Could that have been when the message disappeared? Your soulmate felt overwhelmed by the possibility. They checked another old conversation. There was another clue. Someone had later told them that you did not want to speak anymore. That statement had influenced their decision to step back. But what if that statement was never true? What if you had been waiting for them too? The realization was painful because it changed the meaning of everything that followed. They remembered all the times they wanted to contact you. Each time, they stopped because they believed you had chosen silence. They had protected themselves from rejection without ever knowing whether rejection had actually happened. The room became quiet again. Your soulmate looked at the unknown number. They typed, "Who are you?" The reply arrived quickly. "Someone who knows what happened." That answer created even more questions. Your soulmate asked why this person contacted them now. The response was simple. Because you finally called them. That sentence made their heart stop for a moment. The unknown person knew about the hospital call. They knew you had been contacted. They also seemed to know that this call mattered. Your soulmate asked what they wanted. The answer came slowly. I want you to hear the truth before you make another decision. Another decision. Those words were important. Your soulmate had not told anyone about the decision they had been considering. They had thought about it privately. Yet this person seemed to know. That meant someone had been paying attention. They asked, "What decision?" No answer came immediately. Then another message appeared. The decision about whether you will finally tell them how you feel. Your soulmate placed the phone beside them. They closed their eyes. For months, perhaps longer, they had tried to control their emotions. They had acted practical. They had told themselves that feelings could be managed by distance. But now the truth was becoming harder to avoid. The hospital call had opened something they could not easily close again. They remembered your voice. They remembered how calm they felt when you spoke. They remembered how you understood their silence. Then another memory surfaced. There had been a moment when you almost told them something important. You stopped halfway. They had assumed you changed your mind. Now they wondered if you had simply been waiting for them to speak first. The thought created an emotional shift. Maybe both of you had been waiting. Maybe both of you had misunderstood. Maybe the connection had never truly received a fair chance. Then the family member returned. They saw your soulmate staring at the phone and immediately understood something had happened. What did you find? Your soulmate did not answer. Instead, they asked a question. Did you ever tell them I did not want to speak anymore? The family member looked shocked. They hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Your soulmate knew there was more to the story. Finally, the family member admitted that they had spoken to someone on your behalf. They had believed they were preventing further confusion. They thought your soulmate needed distance. But they had never asked you what you wanted. They had never confirmed your feelings. They had simply assumed. That confession changed everything. Your soulmate realized that several decisions had been made around you instead of with you. And suddenly, the hospital call became more than a moment of emotion. It became a doorway into the truth. Your soulmate picked up the phone once. This time, they did not hesitate. They began writing a message to you. The sentence was short. I need to tell you something. They stopped. Then they continued. I finally understand why we lost so much time. Their finger hovered over the screen. They knew that once they pressed send, there would be no returning to silence. They knew something else. Whatever happened next would depend on truth. The message was ready. But before they sent it, another notification appeared. The unknown person had sent one final warning. Before you tell them everything, ask what they remember about that night. Your soulmate stared at those words. The past still held a missing piece. And that missing piece was connected to you. The message remained unsent. Your soulmate read it again, then locked the phone. The unknown warning had created one final question. What did you remember about that night? They needed your version before trusting any explanation from someone else. For the first time, they understood how dangerous assumptions could become when two people cared deeply but never spoke honestly. The hospital room felt different now. What had begun as a private emotional moment was becoming a search for the missing truth. Your soulmate asked the family member to leave for a few minutes. They needed silence. They needed to think without anyone guiding their decision. Then they opened the old conversation again. Their eyes moved across the screen slowly. Every ordinary sentence now seemed connected to something larger. They remembered the exact time they had tried to contact you. They remembered waiting. They remembered feeling hurt when no answer came. But another memory suddenly appeared. That night, you had called them first. Your soulmate had forgotten the call because it never reached their phone. The call appeared in an old phone record, but there was no missed call notification in their memory. They stared at the screen in disbelief. You had tried to reach them. At almost the same time, they had tried to reach you. Both attempts had failed. Neither of you knew. That discovery changed the emotional weight of the entire past. The silence had never been as simple as they believed. There had been two people reaching toward each other at the same moment, while circumstances created the illusion that neither cared. Your soulmate searched for more records. There were several attempts that evening. One from you. Two from them. Then another from you later that night. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Something had interrupted the communication. They remembered handing the phone to someone earlier. They remembered being told that you had canceled plans. They remembered feeling embarrassed and deciding not to ask again. But now they questioned everything. Who had told them that you canceled? Why had your call never appeared? Why had the message disappeared? And why had someone recently contacted them with knowledge about the hospital call? The questions were becoming impossible to dismiss. Your soulmate called the unknown number again. This time, someone answered. The voice was calm. It did not sound angry or dramatic. It sounded like someone who had waited a long time for the right moment. They asked one thing. Do you still want the truth? Your soulmate answered immediately. Yes. The person explained that they had seen part of what happened that night. They had not understood its importance then. They only realized later that a simple misunderstanding had affected years of emotional decisions. Then came the detail that changed everything. The person said your soulmate had been told that you wanted space. At the same time, you had been told that your soulmate wanted distance. Neither statement had come directly from either of you. Both had been delivered through someone else. That meant the silence between you had been built on information neither of you had personally confirmed. Your soulmate became quiet. They asked who had started it. The person refused to answer immediately. Instead, they said that the name mattered less than the reason. The person involved believed they were protecting someone from emotional confusion. They thought separation would make everything easier. But they were wrong. The separation did not erase the connection. It only buried the conversation. Your soulmate looked toward the hospital door. They suddenly understood why their feelings had returned so strongly during a difficult moment. They had never received closure. Their heart had been living with an unfinished sentence. Then they remembered something you once told them. You said that if two people truly needed to understand each other, they should never let someone else speak for them. Those words had seemed ordinary at the time. Now they felt almost impossible to ignore. Your soulmate opened your contact again. This time, they called. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then the call connected. Neither of you spoke immediately. The silence was different from the old silence. This time, both of you knew that something important was waiting to be said. Your soulmate finally spoke. I need to ask you about that night. Your response was quiet. Which part? That question stopped them. You remembered. Not just the night. You remembered the exact moment when everything changed. Your soulmate asked whether you had tried calling them. You said yes. You explained that you had called more than once. You also explained that you had sent a message because you believed they were ignoring you. Your soulmate looked at the old phone record while listening. The records matched. For the first time, the missing pieces began fitting together. You both realized that each of you had been waiting for the other to explain the silence. Each of you had believed the other person had chosen distance. Meanwhile, someone outside the relationship had unintentionally strengthened that misunderstanding. Then you revealed something your soulmate had never known. You had kept the message you wrote that night. You had never deleted it. Your soulmate asked whether you could read it. There was a pause. Then you said you could. The words were simple. They did not contain blame. They did not demand anything. They only expressed disappointment and a desire for one honest conversation. Your soulmate became emotional. They had spent so much time believing you had moved on without caring. Now they were hearing the opposite. But the biggest revelation had not arrived yet. You told them there was one more thing you remembered from that night. Something you had never understood. Someone had told you that your soulmate had made a final decision about your relationship. You believed it. Your soulmate immediately asked who had told you. You gave the name. Silence filled the call. It was the same person whose actions had just been described. The connection between the missing message, the failed calls, and the false information was finally visible. Your soulmate did not sound angry. They sounded heartbroken. Because they realized something much deeper. The person who had tried to protect them had also kept them from making their own choice. And now, from a hospital room, your soulmate had finally reached the person they should have spoken to first. They took a slow breath. Then they said the words they had avoided for so long. I never wanted us to end like that. You remained silent. Then your soulmate continued. I thought you chose to leave. Your answer was almost a whisper. I thought you did. That sentence changed the entire emotional atmosphere. For years, two people had carried the same wound from opposite sides. Now both could finally see the misunderstanding. But there was still one question left. Why had this truth surfaced now? Why did the hospital call happen at this exact moment? And what had your soulmate discovered after calling you that made them realize this was not simply about the past? The answer was waiting in the message from the unknown number. A final message appeared. Now ask them why they kept your last letter. Your soulmate froze. Because they had never known there was a letter. And suddenly, the past was hiding one more secret. The letter changed the atmosphere instantly. Your soulmate stared at the phone without moving. For years, they had believed there was nothing left to discover about that night. They thought the silence had been explained. They thought the distance had become permanent because both of you had chosen different paths. But now one sentence had reopened everything. Why had you kept their last letter? And more importantly, what had that letter contained? Your soulmate asked you about it directly. There was a long silence on the other side of the call. You did not answer immediately. You seemed to be deciding whether reopening the past was worth the emotional weight it carried. Then you finally admitted that you had kept it. Your soulmate closed their eyes. They remembered writing something years ago, but they had never known whether it reached you. They had written it during one of the most uncertain moments of their life. It was not a dramatic confession. It was something much more vulnerable. They had written that they were confused, afraid of making the wrong choice, and tired of pretending that everything was fine. They had written that they wanted one honest conversation with you before allowing anyone else to influence their decision. But the letter had never been delivered in the way they intended. You explained that you received it much later. By then, everything between you had already become complicated. You had read it more than once. Each time, you found another sentence that made you wonder whether the distance had been a misunderstanding. But you had been afraid to reach out. You believed your soulmate had moved forward. You believed contacting them might reopen something they no longer wanted. So you kept the letter. Not as a promise. Not as proof of destiny. You kept it because it represented a conversation that never happened. Your soulmate listened quietly. Then they asked why you never told them. Your answer was simple. You said you were waiting for them to choose the truth without being pushed. That answer reached deeper than anything else had that night. Your soulmate realized that both of you had been protecting each other in completely different ways. You had stayed silent because you did not want to pressure them. They had stayed silent because they believed you wanted distance. Two people had been trying to avoid hurting each other, yet the silence created the very pain they were trying to prevent. The hospital call had now become something neither of you expected. It was no longer simply a moment of emotional weakness. It had become an opportunity to finally ask questions that should have been asked years earlier. Your soulmate looked at the hospital ceiling and took a slow breath. Then they told you something they had never said aloud. They said that when everything around them became uncertain, your name was the first name they wanted to hear. They had not planned it. They had not chosen it carefully. It simply happened. That realization frightened them because it showed how deeply the unfinished connection still affected them. But there was another reason they had called. Before reaching for the phone, your soulmate had received information that changed their understanding of their current situation. They had learned that a decision they were preparing to make was based on an old assumption. The assumption was that you had already closed the door emotionally. But now they knew that assumption had never been confirmed. They had been preparing to move forward while carrying an incomplete story. That discovery made them stop. They realized they could not make another major decision while ignoring a truth they had never fully examined. The person who had sent the unknown messages then contacted them again. This time, there was no mystery in the message. It said, "You finally asked." Your soulmate knew exactly what it meant. They had finally asked you directly instead of relying on other people. That was the moment everything changed. Not because some invisible force had guaranteed an outcome. Not because the future had suddenly been decided. The change happened because honesty had finally replaced assumption. Your soulmate asked you whether you still had feelings for them. The question was difficult because there was no perfect answer. You could not erase the years between you. You could not pretend nothing had happened. You could not promise that everything would return to the way it once was. So you answered honestly. You said that feelings had not disappeared completely. But you also said that feelings alone were not enough. Your soulmate became quiet again. That answer was stronger than a simple yes. It told them that if they wanted another chance, they would have to approach you with clarity. They would have to stop hiding behind circumstances. They would have to communicate directly. They would have to take responsibility for their own choices. Your soulmate understood. For the first time, they were not looking for a sign from someone else. They were looking at the person involved. You. Then the conversation moved into an even deeper place. Your soulmate admitted that they had often wondered whether you were the person they were supposed to choose. They had never said those words because they feared how serious they sounded. But in that hospital room, surrounded by uncertainty, pretending no longer felt useful. They said they had spent too much time asking what everyone else expected. They had not spent enough time asking what kind of life actually felt honest to them. That realization did not guarantee a relationship. It did something more important first. It created clarity. You both began discussing what had actually happened. There were no dramatic accusations. There was no attempt to rewrite the past. Instead, there was a careful examination of every misunderstanding. One by one, the missing pieces became understandable. A delayed message. A misunderstood conversation. A phone call that never connected. Advice given by someone who thought they were helping. A decision made without complete information. Each event had seemed small by itself. Together, they created years of distance. Your soulmate finally understood why the connection had always felt unfinished. There had never been a true final conversation. There had only been assumptions. And assumptions can become powerful when nobody challenges them. The most emotional moment came when your soulmate asked about the letter again. You said you still had it. They asked whether you remembered the final sentence. You did. The sentence said that if there was ever a chance to speak honestly again, you hoped neither of you would be too proud or too afraid to take it. Your soulmate became silent. They remembered writing those words. They had forgotten them because they believed the letter had disappeared. Now they realized that the words had survived all the years between you. They asked if you still had the original letter. You said yes. They asked why. You answered that some memories are kept because they mattered, even when the future is uncertain. That answer stayed with them. It showed them something important. The purpose of this moment was not necessarily to recreate the past. It was to understand it. Sometimes closure does not mean forgetting someone. Sometimes closure means finally hearing the truth that was missing. And sometimes a second conversation gives two people the freedom to decide what comes next without carrying old misunderstandings. The hospital became the unexpected setting for that realization. Your soulmate had entered that place focused on immediate concerns. They had expected to think about practical matters. Instead, the experience had brought them face to face with an emotional truth they had avoided. They realized that life can make ordinary priorities feel smaller when the heart is forced to slow down. That does not mean every hospital call carries a hidden spiritual message. It means difficult moments can sometimes make people reflect on what they have been postponing. Your soulmate had postponed the truth for too long. Now they were finally willing to face it. Before ending the conversation, they asked one final question. If I had called you that night, would things have been different? You did not answer immediately. Then you said something that they would remember for a long time. Maybe. But we cannot live inside maybe. That sentence brought a strange peace. It did not erase the past. It did not promise an easy future. It simply accepted reality. What happened happened. What was lost could not be recovered exactly as it was. But the truth could still be spoken. And that was enough to begin something different. Your soulmate thanked you for answering. They said they were sorry for believing assumptions without checking them. They apologized for the silence. They apologized for letting other voices become louder than their own heart. You accepted the apology, but you did not rush to make promises. That was important. Real emotional healing does not require instant decisions. It requires honesty, patience, and consistent actions. Your soulmate understood that now. They told you they wanted to rebuild trust slowly if you were willing. They did not ask you to forget the past. They asked for the chance to show you something different through their choices. That was the true revelation behind the hospital call. The biggest change did not happen because your soulmate was in a hospital. It happened because the situation gave them a reason to stop running from an unfinished conversation. The call forced them to ask what they had been avoiding. The answer led them back to you. But the meaning of that return was not that a guaranteed future had been written somewhere beyond your control. The meaning was that truth had finally entered a space where assumptions had lived for too long. There is a powerful lesson in what happened. When emotions remain unresolved, silence can create stories that are not true. People begin filling gaps with fear. They interpret delayed replies as rejection. They interpret distance as indifference. They interpret silence as a final decision. But sometimes silence simply means two people are afraid to ask the question that matters most. Your soulmate finally asked. And you finally answered. That was the breakthrough. The hospital call became the doorway. The letter became the missing clue. The old phone records became evidence of a misunderstanding. The unknown message became the push toward honesty. But none of those things could decide your future for you. Only your choices could do that. Your soulmate understood this before the call ended. They said they no longer wanted to make decisions based on what other people thought you felt. They wanted to hear from you directly. They wanted to speak directly. They wanted to stop allowing fear to control important conversations. You agreed that if anything continued between you, it would have to be built differently. No guessing. No hidden messages. No outside voices speaking for either person. No pretending everything was fine when it was not. That agreement became more meaningful than any dramatic promise. Then the conversation ended. Your soulmate placed the phone beside them and looked toward the window. The hospital room was still the same. The lights were still the same. The sounds outside had not changed. Yet their perspective had changed completely. They had entered the conversation believing they were calling because they needed you. They ended the conversation realizing they had needed truth. And you were the person they had never fully stopped associating with that truth. Later that night, your soulmate opened the old letter again. They read it carefully. This time, they did not read it with regret. They read it with understanding. They realized that the letter had survived because the conversation it represented had never truly happened. Now it finally had. They placed the letter somewhere safe and made a decision. Not a decision about forcing a relationship. Not a decision about controlling the future. A decision about honesty. They decided that whatever happened next, they would never again allow fear to make their choices for them. The next morning, they contacted you again. The message was simple. Thank you for answering. Then another message followed. Whatever happens from here, I am grateful we finally told each other the truth. That was the emotional ending neither of you expected. There was no dramatic promise. There was no perfect ending wrapped in certainty. There was something more real. There was clarity. There was peace. There was the possibility of a future chosen freely instead of shaped by misunderstanding. And that is why you should not ignore what happened after the hospital call. The most important part was not the phone call itself. It was what the call revealed. It revealed that unresolved feelings can survive silence. It revealed that assumptions can separate people who never truly chose separation. It revealed that one honest conversation can change the way the entire past is understood. Most importantly, it revealed that love should never require you to abandon your own clarity. If this message speaks to your heart, take it as a moment of reflection rather than a guaranteed prediction. You do not need to chase anyone. You do not need to force an outcome. You do not need to treat every coincidence as proof of destiny. Instead, remember the lesson inside this story. Choose honesty. Choose patience. Choose communication. Let people show their intentions through consistent actions. And if someone from your past returns, listen carefully to what they say, but pay even closer attention to what they do. A meaningful connection should bring greater clarity over time. It should not require endless confusion. It should not depend on guessing games. It should not leave you constantly questioning your worth. If a conversation is meant to happen, let it happen with respect and honesty. If a door opens, you can decide whether you want to walk through it. If a door stays closed, you can still move forward with peace. Your future does not become smaller because one relationship changes. Your life remains valuable regardless of who stays or leaves. Your heart deserves truth, not uncertainty disguised as hope. So remember the hospital call. Remember the missing letter. Remember the unanswered questions. But most of all, remember what finally changed everything. Someone stopped assuming and started asking. Someone stopped hiding and started speaking. Someone finally chose honesty over fear. That is where the real transformation happened. If you stayed until this moment, let this be your reminder that your story is still being written through your choices. Do not let an old misunderstanding define your entire future. Do not let silence convince you that you are forgotten. And do not let hope become a reason to ignore reality. Hold hope and wisdom together. If a conversation comes, meet it with a calm heart. If an apology comes, look for genuine change. If love returns, let it prove itself through consistency. And if nothing returns, know that your life can still move toward something beautiful. Comment, I choose clarity, if you believe honest communication can change everything. Share this message with someone who may need to hear it today. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional spiritual guidance and meaningful soulmate stories. Until the next message, keep your heart open, keep your mind clear, and never forget that sometimes the most powerful answer begins with one honest question.